Stop embarrassing us." The words came out of my mother's mouth so casually that for a moment I thought I'd misheard her. She was standing by the kitchen counter, holding her morning coffee, wearing the same silk robe she'd worn for years, a symbol of quiet pride in the life she thought she had built. Her tone was even, almost bored, as if she were commenting on the weather. "Stop embarrassing us with your job, Emily. You're better than that. Or at least, you should be." I froze in the doorway, my hand still gripping the strap of my work bag. I had just come home from another long night shift, hair messy, eyes half dead, the smell of espresso still clinging to my clothes. My job wasn't glamorous. I was a barista. Well, a night shift cafe supervisor, if you wanted to make it sound more professional. I worked at a coffee shop near the hospital. Most nights I served exhausted nurses, bleary-eyed students, and the occasional insomniac who just needed someone to talk to. It wasn't what I had dreamed of doing after college, but it was what I could afford. I blinked at her, trying to process what she'd said. "Embarrassing you?" I repeated softly. She sighed, setting her mug down. "Emily, your brother's fiancé works at a law firm. Your cousin just got promoted at a marketing agency. And you—" She gestured vaguely toward my apron. "You make coffee." Her words hit harder than she knew. I'd grown up hearing my mother talk about success as if it were a religion. Appearances mattered. Titles mattered. Where you lived, what you drove, who you knew, all of it mattered. I used to think she was harsh because she wanted the best for me. But as I got older, I realized something else. She didn't want me to be happy. She wanted me to be impressive. "I'm paying my own rent," I said quietly. "I'm not asking you for money." "That's not the point," she replied sharply. "It's about how you live. What people think of you reflects on this family. You're 27 and still working the kind of job people have in college. Don't you see how that looks?" I stared at her. The woman who had once kissed my scraped knees, who used to tell me I could be anything I wanted. Now, she looked at me as if I were a stain she couldn't scrub out. "I like my job," I said finally. "I meet kind people. I make enough to get by, and I'm working on something new, my own thing." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, that little business idea again?" "It's not little," I said, heat rising in my chest. "It's real. I've been saving up and She cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Emily, dreams don't pay bills. You need stability. You need to make us proud. I'm tired of explaining to my friends that you run a coffee shop." That word, explaining, stuck in my throat like a stone, explaining me, as if my life was something she had to justify. I didn't say another word. I just grabbed my bag and walked out, her voice trailing behind me. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you." But I had to. If I didn't, I might have said something I couldn't take back. That day, I drove straight to the cafe, even though I wasn't on shift. The moment I stepped inside, the familiar sound of steaming milk and soft indie music calmed me. It was small, a little hole in the wall with chipped tiles and handwritten menu boards. But it was mine, in spirit, if not in ownership. "Rough morning?" my coworker Jason asked, glancing up from the espresso machine. I forced a small smile. "You could say that." He grinned. "Family again?" "Family again." He nodded sympathetically. "You know, one day you'll have that business up and running and she'll be bragging about you nonstop." "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. At the back of the cafe, I had a small notebook, my secret weapon. Inside were pages of sketches, notes and plans for a company I'd been building quietly for 2 years, Brew Bloom, a subscription service for ethically sourced, sustainable coffee beans from small farmers around the world. I'd been designing everything myself, the packaging, the branding, the marketing plan. Every night after work, I'd come home, open my laptop, and build it piece by piece. Nobody knew except Jason. Not my friends, not my family. I didn't want their doubt to poison it. And honestly, I didn't want my mother's voice in my head when I worked. That sharp, polished voice that said, "You'll embarrass us. Later that evening, when I finally got home again, I found my dad sitting in his recliner, newspaper in hand. He gave me a half smile. "Your mom's just stressed," he said quietly without looking up. "You know how she gets." "I know," I said softly, "but it still hurts." He sighed. "She wants you to be secure, Em. She just doesn't know how to say it right." I wanted to believe that, I really did, but deep down I knew that my mother's version of love came with conditions, and right now I didn't meet any of them. That night, I looked around my small apartment. The mismatched furniture, the secondhand laptop, the corkboard full of sticky notes. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I whispered to myself, "You'll make it." Just not her way. And I got back to work. A few months later, things began to shift. Slowly but surely, my small online shop started gaining traction. I'd built a website, sent out samples, and posted short videos about how each bag of coffee supported a real family farmer overseas. People started responding. Orders trickled in, then doubled, then tripled. Every time I packed a box, I thought about my mother's words, and I sealed it tighter. But success didn't come without tension. My mother noticed the extra hours, the exhaustion, the weekends I skipped family brunches. When I tried to tell her I was running my own thing, she laughed. "Emily, if you were running a business, you wouldn't still be living in that tiny apartment." I didn't argue. I let her believe what she wanted, because soon she wouldn't have to imagine anymore. The first time Brew Bloom hit $50,000 in monthly sales, I cried. Not from pride, but from relief. All those nights I doubted myself. All those days I bit my tongue while she called me embarrassing. They finally meant something. I called my dad that night, telling him, "It's real, I did it." He was quiet for a long moment before saying, "I knew you would, sweetheart." And that was enough for me. For now. The weight of expectations. The day my first business article went live, I didn't even know it had happened. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was in the cafe, sleeves rolled up, trying to fix the stubborn grinder that kept clogging. Jason was humming some old song off-key, and the world felt ordinary. Beautifully, quietly ordinary. Then my phone started buzzing. Once, then twice, then relentlessly. I frowned, wiped my hands on a towel, and checked the screen. "You're in the paper," the first text read. Then another. "Emily, this is amazing. Just saw the feature in Small Business Weekly." I blinked. "What?" Jason looked up from the counter. "What's going on?" I opened the link someone had sent. There it was. My name, in bold. From Night Shift to Nationwide, how one woman's coffee startup is brewing change. They had found me through a charity event I'd sponsored for small farmers. I hadn't even known they were planning to publish it. But there it was. My story, my photo, my brand. Jason whistled. "Well, boss lady, looks like you just made it." I laughed, half in disbelief, half in fear, because I knew exactly what this meant. If I knew about the article, it was only a matter of time before she did. That night, the inevitable happened. When I walked into my parents' house for dinner, Mom was already waiting. The newspaper was on the table, folded open to the page with my face on it. "Well," she said, her tone unreadable, "it seems everyone's talking about you." I sat down carefully. I didn't know they'd publish it. It just happened. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp and distant. "You could have told me. Do you know how ridiculous it felt when Linda called to congratulate me on your business? I didn't even know what to say." I bit my lip. "Mom, you've never really wanted to talk about my business." She frowned. "That's not true." "It is," I said, my voice trembling. "You said I was embarrassing the family. You made me feel like what I was doing wasn't good enough. And now that people are noticing, suddenly you're upset because you weren't the first to know." Her face stiffened, the color rising in her cheeks. "Don't twist this around, Emily. I'm just saying that communication matters. I'm your mother." "I know," I said softly, "and I've always wanted you to be proud of me." For a second, her expression faltered. Just for a second. But pride was a heavy coat she had worn all her life, and she quickly pulled it tighter around herself. "Well," she said finally, "I hope this little business of yours is stable, because the world can be cruel to people who dream too big." I didn't reply. I just looked down at my hands, the same hands that had poured coffee, folded boxes, typed emails, built everything from scratch. Dream too big? Maybe that was the point. In the weeks that followed, Brew Bloom exploded. We got featured on a major podcast. Orders poured in. I hired 2 employees, then 5. My tiny studio apartment turned into a warehouse of coffee bags, packaging labels, and shipping boxes. I barely slept, but I didn't care. The more we grew, the more the contrast between my world and my family's world deepened. At family dinners, my mom would still talk about Ryan's real estate ventures, or how his girlfriend was so classy. When someone mentioned my name, she'd smile thinly and say, "Yes, Emily's doing her coffee thing." Her tone was always the same. Polite, detached, performative. It was as if she couldn't decide whether to be proud or ashamed. Then came the night everything cracked open. We were all at my parents' house again for my dad's birthday. The whole family was there. Ryan, his girlfriend, cousins, neighbors, the kind of gathering that smelled like roast beef and tension. Halfway through dinner, Ryan leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So, Em, how's life as a caffeine dealer?" The table laughed. Even my mother smiled. I forced a small laugh, trying not to show how much it stung. "It's actually going really well, Ryan. We're expanding to Canada next month." He raised an eyebrow. "Really? Expanding, huh? Guess caffeine's the new crypto." Laughter again. I glanced at my mother, expecting at least a word of support, but she just sipped her wine. Something inside me hardened. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I employ 12 people now. Most of them left dead-end jobs to work for me, and every purchase we get helps farmers send their kids to school." The table fell silent for a moment. Then my mother said it. "Emily, must you turn every dinner into a speech about coffee?" It was the same tone she used when I was 15 and spoke too loud in public. The tone that said, "You're an embarrassment." I stood up slowly. My chair scraped the floor, sharp and final. "No," I said. "I won't talk about coffee. I'll talk about what you never wanted to see. That I built something from nothing. That I've made it, even if it doesn't look like success to you." Her face froze. I looked at my father, whose eyes were full of quiet sadness. Then at my brother, who looked amused. And then I walked out. That night, I drove for hours. The city lights blurred past like ghosts, and I couldn't stop crying. For years, I had begged for her approval, her acknowledgement, her warmth. I had convinced myself that once I succeeded, she would finally love me loudly. But instead, the higher I climbed, the colder she became. It hit me then. My worth had never depended on her praise. I had built my life brick by brick, out of rejection, exhaustion, and grit. When I finally stopped the car, I was parked in front of my cafe. The windows were dark, the chairs stacked, the smell of roasted beans still lingering. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the bank addressed to my parents' house. My name was listed as the co-signer on something I didn't recognize. Confused, I called the bank. After a long pause, the voice on the other end said, "Ms. Parker, it appears your parents' mortgage was refinanced 5 years ago, and your name was added as a guarantor." My heart skipped a beat. What? Apparently, they had used my information back when I first started working, when I had excellent credit and no debt. I was barely 22 then, and they had never told me. I hung up the phone, trembling. That night, when I confronted my mother, she said flatly, "It was a family decision. You didn't need to worry about it." "Mom, that's fraud," I shouted. "You used my name without asking me." She crossed her arms. "It was to keep this house. You should be grateful we trusted you." Grateful. The word echoed in my mind until it turned bitter. I left her house that night, but I made myself a quiet promise as I drove away, a promise born not from anger, but from clarity. If she was going to use my name for her house, then one day I'd make that name powerful enough to mean something. And when that day came, I would pay off her mortgage, not out of obligation, but out of strength. The price of success. 3 years after that dinner, my life looked completely different. Brew Bloom had gone from a small kitchen startup to a nationwide brand. We had cafes in 5 states, partnerships with hotels, and a growing online subscription base. Every morning I woke up before sunrise, grabbed my laptop, and felt that mix of exhaustion and awe that only comes from building something out of nothing. But success, I learned, has a way of revealing who truly roots for you and who only claps when you're beneath them. It started with an article in Forbes Women in Business. The editor called my story a triumph of persistence over prejudice. When the issue came out, my inbox exploded. Investors, journalists, even former classmates, the same ones who used to call me the coffee girl, suddenly wanted to grab lunch to reconnect. I should have felt unstoppable. Instead, I felt hollow, because I knew what was still missing. I hadn't spoken to my mother in over a year. It wasn't that I hadn't tried. I sent texts, short ones, careful ones. "Hey, Mom, just checking in," or "Saw Dad last week, hope you're both well." Most went unanswered. Once, she replied with, "Glad things are going well. Take care." That was it. Take care. 2 words that said everything and nothing at once. For the longest time, I wondered what I had done wrong. Why every success made her quieter, not prouder. I replayed her words from that night. "Stop embarrassing us with your job." Maybe she still believed it. Maybe she couldn't see past the version of me that used to come home with burned hands from coffee machines and hair smelling like espresso. But I had stopped needing her permission to be proud of myself. At least that's what I told everyone. By the time Brew Bloom opened its 5th cafe, I had hired a COO, Daniel, a sharp, confident man who'd spent years in corporate food service. He was everything I wasn't, polished, assertive, and fluent in boardroom language. Investors loved him. For a while, I did too. He pushed for growth. "Emily, this brand could be the next blue bottle," he'd say. "You just need to stop thinking like a barista and start thinking like a CEO." It sounded reasonable until the decision started to feel off. He wanted to cut ties with small farmers to streamline supply. He said fair trade certification was too expensive. He started using words like optics and profit margins instead of integrity and partnership. When I pushed back, he smiled that patronizing smile I'd seen too many times before. "You're being emotional," he'd say. That word, emotional. It was what my mother used to say when I cried after bad grades or heartbreaks. And just like then, I realized I wasn't emotional. I was right. One afternoon, I walked into the office early and found Daniel in the conference room on a call with a potential investor. He didn't see me at first. "Yes, she's great for the brand image," he was saying, his voice low but confident. "But between you and me, she's not the reason this business is scaling. I've been running the operations for a while now." My breath caught. She's basically the face. Passionate, sure, but a little naive about the big picture. I froze in the doorway. Naive. It was like hearing my family's old dinner table echoing through the walls. That same quiet dismissal, that same subtle erasure. When he hung up, I stepped inside. Naive. He spun around, startled. "Emily, Keep going," I said. My voice was calm, but inside something fierce had awakened. "What else am I, Daniel? Just the girl who makes coffee while the grown-ups handle the real work?" He sighed. "Don't make this personal. You're taking it out of context." "No," I said. "You've been taking me out of context since the day you joined." That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone left. I opened the files, the contracts, the board minutes. And what I found broke my heart. quiet moves he'd made behind my back, funneling funds toward his own consulting firm, manipulating numbers to make me look inexperienced. The next morning, I fired him. No dramatic shouting, no tears, just a single letter of termination and a security escort. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as I watched him leave, I felt lighter than I had in years, because for once I had chosen myself. Not fear, not politeness, not validation, just myself. The next few months were chaos. Cleaning up Daniel's mess meant sleepless nights, financial strain, and even public criticism. Some investors left. I nearly lost 2 of our cafes. But something beautiful happened too. The staff rallied. Customers sent letters. Local communities offered to host pop-ups to keep sales flowing. It wasn't just my business anymore, it was a movement. And when I stood at a small business conference that fall, speaking about resilience and ethics, I looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces, young women with notebooks, entrepreneurs with tired eyes. And I realized something profound. Every time someone had called me embarrassing, naive, emotional, they were really saying, "You make me uncomfortable because you don't need my approval to exist." And that was power. A month later, my father called me. "Your mom's been asking about you," he said, his voice hesitant. My heart ached. "Really?" He cleared his throat. "She's proud of you, Emily. She just doesn't know how to say it." I smiled sadly. "She never did." "She's been struggling with the house payments," he added quietly. "I didn't want to tell you, but the mortgage rate went up again." I felt a chill run through me, the same mortgage she'd put in my name. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat in silence, staring at my reflection in the window, the reflection of a woman my mother had never quite believed in. And I made a decision that would change everything. The house I paid for the day. I decided to pay off my parents' house wasn't planned. It wasn't some cinematic slow-motion moment of revenge. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the air smells like cold coffee and unfinished business. I woke up early, went for a walk along the harbor near my apartment, and caught my reflection in a bakery window. Tired eyes, slight smile, determined. It hit me all at once. I had built something my family never thought I could. And maybe, just maybe, I could use that strength to rewrite how the story ended. Not for them, for me. By lunchtime, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, pen in hand, looking over the paperwork. "Are you sure you want to do this anonymously?" she asked. "Most people want the credit for something like this." I shook my head. "They don't need to know it's from me, not yet." It wasn't pride driving me. It was peace. I didn't want an apology. I wanted closure. The numbers weren't small. The mortgage had years left and interest had ballooned. But after the last investment round and the growth Brew Bloom had seen that quarter, it wasn't impossible. As I signed the final document, I thought about that night years ago. My mother sitting across the dinner table, her wine glass half full, her voice sharp and cold. "Stop embarrassing us with your job, Emily." Back then, I'd cried in silence. Now, I just exhaled. I was no longer the girl who needed their validation. I was the woman they couldn't define anymore. 2 weeks later, my father called again. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "Something strange happened. The bank just sent a letter. The mortgage is paid off entirely. We don't know who—" I smiled into the receiver. "That's great, Dad. You both deserve some peace." Do you know anything about it?" I hesitated. "Maybe it's a sign that good things come when you least expect them." He chuckled softly. "You sound just like your grandmother." I froze for a second. That comparison, it hit deeper than I expected, because Grandma had always believed in me. When everyone else saw my coffee shop dream as foolish, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Emily, people will mock what they don't understand. That's how you know you're ahead of them." She passed away before she could see what I built, but somehow I felt her with me in that moment. Maybe that's why I did it, not for my mother, but for the woman who taught me to keep building even when no one clapped. A week later, I got an invitation to dinner from my mother. It was short and formal. Sunday, 6 p.m. Come home. I almost didn't go, but curiosity and a strange sense of completion pulled me there. When I arrived, everything looked the same. The white porch, the slightly crooked mailbox, the hydrangeas she never managed to keep alive. She opened the door herself. "Emily," she said, surprised at her own softness. "You came." I did. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she used to correct my career choices. There was silence for a while. Awkward, fragile silence. Then she said, "We got a letter from the bank. Someone paid off the mortgage." I sipped my tea. "That's wonderful news." She stared at me for a moment. "Was it you?" I didn't answer directly. "Mom, does it matter who did it?" Her lips tightened. "It matters to me." I met her eyes. Then yes, it was me. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Finally, she said, barely above a whisper, "Why?" I smiled sadly. "Because I could." She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother look small, not weak, not pitiful, just human. "I said some terrible things to you," she whispered. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment, from struggle. I didn't realize I was becoming the thing you needed to rise above." That broke something open in me. Not anger, not relief, but understanding. "You were doing what you thought was best," I said quietly, "but your idea of best was smaller than mine." She nodded slowly. "I see that now." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, and outside, wind brushed the curtains. Then she reached across the table and took my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. I just didn't know how to say it without feeling like I failed. Tears blurred my vision. I squeezed her hand. "You didn't fail, Mom. You just needed to see me differently." After dinner, she walked me to the door. Before I left, she touched my arm and said, "You really are just like your grandmother." I smiled. "That's the best thing you could have said." Driving home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt free. Forgiveness isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. A whispered thank you between people who finally understand each other's pain. The next morning, I returned to work early. My team surprised me with a small cake. Someone had framed the Forbes article and placed it beside my desk. The caption read, "From the girl who embarrassed her family to the woman who built one." I laughed. Then I cried. Because that was the truth. Family isn't about who you're born to. It's about who believes in you when you're still just a spark. And sometimes, when life comes full circle, the best kind of victory isn't revenge, it's redemption. The price of peace. It's strange, really, how the loudest chapters of your life end not with a shout, but with silence. Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that finally lets you breathe. That's how the months felt after I paid off my parents' mortgage. Quiet, uncomplicated, almost peaceful. The news traveled through our small town faster than I expected. My mom never said outright that I was the one who'd done it, but word had a way of spreading, through neighbors, through church friends, through the same grapevine that once whispered about how poor Emily was wasting her life on coffee beans. Now, those same whispers said things like, "She's done so well for herself." I always knew she had something special. Funny how quickly people rewrite the past once success walks in wearing heels. My relationship with my parents didn't transform overnight. Healing, I learned, isn't some cinematic embrace. It's showing up, again and again, even when you're still sore from the wounds. Mom started calling more often. mostly small talk at first. Then she began sending me pictures of the house, the garden she was finally tending again, the porch swing she'd repainted, and once she sent me a photo of herself holding a mug from Brew Bloom. Her caption read, "I get it now." That simple message hit me harder than all the money I'd ever make. Dad was quieter about it. His pride was stitched differently, subtler, reserved. But one day he stopped by my shop unexpectedly. He stood by the door for a moment, watching me work. When I finally noticed him, he just said, "Smells like success in here." It was the closest thing to "I'm proud of you" I'd ever get from him, and that was enough. The business continued to grow, not explosively, not like some overnight success story people love to fantasize about. It grew steadily, intentionally, the way good coffee brews, slow, controlled, and deeply satisfying. We opened a second location, then a third. Each one carried a piece of me. The girl who was told to stop embarrassing her family, and the woman who learned that dignity isn't granted by others, it's built by your own hands. But even with everything I had accomplished, I didn't forget the version of me who once sat crying in her car outside a family dinner, wondering if she'd ever be enough. I still keep that girl close, as a reminder never to measure myself by anyone else's applause. One spring evening, about a year after I paid off the house, Mom invited me over again. This time, it wasn't tense. The air didn't feel thick with judgment or unspoken words. She made dinner. Real dinner, not the performative kind she used to make when guests came over. We laughed, we told stories, and for the first time in years, it felt like a family gathering instead of a silent competition. After dessert, she said quietly, "You know, I was wrong back then. I thought success meant prestige, titles, salaries, approval. I didn't understand that peace matters more." I smiled gently. "Took me a while to learn that, too." She nodded. "But you figured it out sooner than I did." That night, before I left, she handed me an old photo, one I thought had been lost years ago. It was me at 17 standing behind the counter of my first cafe job, grinning, holding a paper cup with my name on it. "I found it," she said softly, "in the attic. I almost threw it out once. I'm glad I didn't." I took the photo and felt my throat tighten. "Thanks, Mom." That picture wasn't just a memory. It was proof that even when people tried to erase me, the universe had other plans. A few months later, Brew Bloom got featured in a local documentary about women entrepreneurs. They filmed inside my shop, capturing the clatter of cups, the warmth of the light, the rhythm of people connecting. At the end of the segment, the interviewer asked, "What does success mean to you now, Emily?" I paused before answering. "Success," I said slowly, "used to mean proving everyone wrong. But now it means living in a way that makes me proud, even if no one claps." The interviewer smiled. "Would you say forgiveness was part of that journey?" I thought for a moment. Forgiveness wasn't a chapter in my story. It was the whole book. You can't build peace while holding on to resentment. I had to let it go, not for them, but for me. When the documentary aired, my mom called me, crying. "I wish Grandma could see this," she said. "She can," I told her softly, "just not the way we can." We stayed on the phone in silence for a while, the kind of silence that's comfortable now, full of love instead of regret. I realized then that every insult, every dismissal, every painful moment I endured had shaped me into someone stronger, more grounded, more kind. I had become the woman my younger self needed, and that, more than anything, was my true victory. A few weeks later, on a calm Sunday morning, I drove out to visit Grandma's grave. The sun was warm and the breeze smelled faintly of jasmine, her favorite flower. I placed a single white bloom beside her stone and whispered, "You were right, Grandma. They mocked what they didn't understand, but I kept going." I laughed quietly. "And you'd love this part. Mom drinks my coffee every morning now." The wind rustled through the trees as if she were laughing back. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet settle in. Not the kind of quiet that used to sting, but the kind that feels earned, like a deep exhale after years of holding your breath. When I got back to my car, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't see the girl who once begged for approval. I saw a woman who built her own worth, one cup, one dream, one heartbreak at a time. And I realized something else. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving yourself right. Because in the end, I didn't pay off that house to show I could. I did it to show myself that love, real love, means freeing yourself from needing permission to exist. That's the story I carry now. Not one of anger, but of peace. Not one of revenge, but of redemption. And every time I brew that first pot of coffee each morning, I think of where I came from, who I became, and how, despite everything, I finally found home within myself.